The wind was howling outside, whistling through those tiny vents in the prison walls. It was supposed to storm like crazy later, a real blizzard coming down from the north. I was just hoping it would hold off for a few more hours, just long enough for us to transfer this prisoner. A few more hours and this will all be over, I kept muttering to myself. Everything's set, Warden. I did a final check on cell block D, just to be sure, Sam said, approaching me down the hall. He looked nervous, fiddling with his belt and gear. What about the isolation chamber? I asked. Yeah, checked it 3 times, he replied, shifting his weight. But why are we clearing out the whole block for one guy? Blake, clipboard in hand, came around the corner. Because this guy's too important to be around the other inmates, I guess. Not the time, Blake, I said as another guard ran past with some heavy duty cuffs. Did you get the medkit? Yes, sir. Everything's ready, Blake said, consulting his clipboard. Hurt monitor, pressure sensors, the whole 9 yards. Smith's doing a final inventory check now. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Sir, Sam cuffed. The National Guard. You're wondering about the National Guard. I finished for him, steering them both towards the control room. The lights flickered as we walked. Outside, the snow was already coming down in thick sheets. The prison's floodlights barely cut through it. Sir, we're not getting anything on the landlines, Smith said from the communications desk. Try the backups, I ordered. Nothing there either. Must be the storm. No way we can reach the main relay station. The wind was a monster now, and I had a feeling it was more than just a storm. We just heard from the National Guard convoy, Blake said, tapping his earpiece. You'll be here in 10. Sam was practically glued to the window, his breath fogging up the glass. Should we postpone the transfer, sir? Can't do that, I said, watching the snow pile up against the outer fence. Gotta follow protocol. The emergency lights were going crazy. I grabbed my coat and radio. Thankfully, the radio still worked, so we had short range comms at least. Blake, you're with me. Sam, stay here with Smith and keep an eye on the screens. Okay, sir, Sam replied. And if we lose comms again, we're gonna have to play it by ear. It took us longer than usual to reach the prison entrance. The whole building was creaking and groaning. Blake thankfully kept his mouth shut for once. When we finally stepped outside, the storm hit us like a wall. Snow was flying sideways. I could barely see a thing. The only light came from the convoy's headlights. This is insane, Blake yelled over the wind. I didn't have time to answer. One of their vehicles skidded on the ice, and then it was a pilot. 3 more vehicles slammed into it, and 2 others slid off the road into the trees. Send medical, I screamed into my radio, running for the crash. The wind ripped the words away. I saw National Guard guys disappearing into the woods. Blake climbed out of one of the working vehicles, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. The captive? She yelled. We need to get the captive. It took forever to reach the transport vehicle. It looked okay from the outside, but the electronics were fried. We had to crank it open manually. Inside, emergency lights cast an eerie glow. The prisoner was still strapped down, but he looked off. His skin was shimmering, almost liquid, and he was smiling at me. The storm, he said, his voice oddly calm. It's beautiful, isn't it, Warden? Blake pulled his gun. I told him to stand down. Sir, Blake said, wiping blood from her face. We gotta get him inside. We're losing people out here. I tried my radio, but all I got was static. We were cut off. Escort protocol, I told Blake, looking her in the eye. Wrist restraints, hands on him. Blake, you take the front. Blake, you bring up the rear." As we started to escort him back to the prison, he chuckled softly. There was something about that sound that made my skin crawl. I had a feeling he'd been waiting for this. "All right, let's go," I said, reaching for the prisoner's arm. Even through the jumpsuit, his skin was freezing. Too cold. I took his arm, and we started making our way back to the prison entrance. I could hear Blake behind me, counting the guards who had already vanished into the blizzard. Too many. Way too many for a routine transfer. As we approached the front entrance, the prisoner spoke to me in a low voice. "Rise and shine, Warden. This is where the fun begins." We stepped inside, and the doors slammed shut behind us. The wind was still a beast, but it sounded muffled now that we were inside. It was warmer too, and the snow on my clothes started melting. The prisoner seemed to cast these long, weird shadows in the dim light. We didn't stick around the entrance for long, just a few quick checks, and then we headed deeper into the prison. Those heavy doors clanged shut behind us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. "Processing room first," I said. "Standard procedure." Blake stood in the doorway, blood still smeared on her face. "Sir, I need to find my people." "Roger that." "Blake comes check." "No good," Blake said, tapping his receiver. Whatever knocked out the signal is still messing things up. The prisoner laughed, a chilling sound that echoed down the hall. They won't be seeing their friends again. The storm has taken them. Quiet. Blake snapped, gripping his gun. "Go find your people, Blake," I said, guiding the prisoner towards the processing room. "Focus," she muttered to herself before heading down the hallway. In the processing room, the lights buzzed and flickered. "He's got the medical equipment," Sam said, holding up the monitors. "But with all this interference, I don't know how accurate the readings will be." "Just hook him up. It's better than nothing." We strapped the prisoner to the chair. It felt weird, like trying to hold on to smoke. The cuffs seemed to fit him snugly, though I had a feeling they wouldn't do much if he really wanted to get loose. "You have a strong heart, Warden," he said, staring at my chest. "Not like your men. Their hearts are like hummingbirds." The heart monitor beeped erratically. "This can't be right," Sam said, his voice shaky. "These readings, they're impossible." I felt a surge of panic. The temperature reading was way off, and the heart monitor was showing a bizarre pattern. "Nice machines," the prisoner said, his eyes fixed on the equipment. "They know exactly what they're looking for, but what if I'm not what they're looking for?" The numbers on the screen changed, and a moment later, frost started creeping across the monitor. "Blake, prep the quarantine cell," I said, trying to stay calm. "Sam, complete the processing checks. Let's get him out of here, leaving so soon," the prisoner asked. "We were just getting started. I wanted to ask you about measurements, about certainty." The lights flickered again, and the room felt colder. "Sir," Blake said from the door, "the quarantine cell is ready, but there's a new problem. Smith says the backup generators are failing," Sam added. "If we don't hurry, we might lose power completely." I nodded. "Let's get him to the quarantine cell." We unstrapped the prisoner. The monitor let out a piercing alarm before going dead, the screen completely frosted over. The prisoner stood up, and we led him back down the hallway. The wind howled louder now, and the building groaned with every gust. "Tell me, Warden," the prisoner whispered, "do you think there are thresholds? Times when one world becomes another?" "Just keep walking," I replied, clutching his arm. His skin was so cold it was making my hand numb. The quarantine cell was up ahead, The door opened, light spilling out into the hallway. "Home sweet home," Blake said, attempting a joke. But as we got closer, he slowed down, listening to something only he could hear. "The storm is changing. Do you feel it, Warden? How it tugs at the seams of the world." The lights went out. For a split second, there was complete darkness. And in that darkness, I felt like the prisoner was changing into something else. "Put him in the cell," I yelled. We shoved him into the brightly lit room. Cameras covered every corner. The prisoner walked calmly to the bed in the middle of the room. "So much effort, so much planning," he said, looking around. "Protecting yourself from what you understand, but not from what you don't." My radio crackled to life. It was Blake's voice, barely audible through the static. "Found them camped up in the trees." Then the radio went dead again. "Shut the door, Warden," the prisoner whispered. "The storm needs to eat, and your people need you." I left the quarantine wing, heading for my office. The rain was still pounding against the windows. Every door I passed seemed to lock behind me with a heavy clang. It was 11:47 p.m. when I finally reached my desk. I couldn't stop thinking about what the prisoner had said. It was like he was haunting me, even though he was locked up tight. Just as I sat down, Sam burst in. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Sir, I need to take emergency leave. Family issues." He was shaking. "Sit down, Sam." He sat, but he looked ready to bolt at any second. "For how long?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. 3, maybe 4 days. "It's my sister Shia." He trailed off, staring into space. "She needs me." The wind rattled the window, and we both looked out at the darkness. "Sam?" I said slowly. "What did you see on your last patrol?" He looked surprised. "Sir, you've been acting weird ever since yesterday. Blake said you wouldn't do the perimeter check." He seemed like he wanted to say more, but then he just shook his head. "No, sir, just the wind." Another rattle at the window, louder this time. "Okay," I said finally, "but I need you back here in 4 days tops. We're stretched thin as it is." "Thanks, boss." He practically jumped to his feet, some of the tension leaving his body. But on his way out, he stopped at the door. "Sir, I'd avoid the tree line after dark, if I were you. Sometimes, what you think you see isn't what you think it is." He was gone before I could answer. I rubbed my eyes, a headache building behind my temples. The radio crackled to life. It was Blake. "We need you in the monitoring room," he said, his voice tight. Blake and Smith were glued to the security feeds. One of the cameras, the one overlooking the eastern perimeter, was showing nothing but static. "It was working 5 minutes ago," Smith said, tapping at the keys. "No, it's not. I thought I saw movement in the static, a blurred shape slithering through the trees." For a moment, the picture came into focus, and I saw a naked, human-like figure. "Holy crap," Blake breathed. "Was that a—" The screen shut off, along with half the monitors in the room. When they came back on, the figure was gone. "Have maintenance check the cameras," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Increase patrols around the east wing." "Sir," Smith said, "the guards have been talking about what they've been seeing outside." "There's nothing outside," I replied. "They're seeing things. The storm is playing tricks on them." "Have you heard any of those sounds since then?" Blake asked, his face pale. "No," I lied. "But let me know if anything else strange happens, and keep it quiet. We don't need to start a panic." Later that night, I lay in bed trying to sleep. The wind was howling again, and I could almost hear words in it. I finally drifted off, but my dreams were filled with long corridors and dark shadows. I heard voices whispering in a language I didn't understand. I felt the cold breath of the storm on my neck. I woke up in a cold sweat, feeling like someone was watching me. The room was freezing, and the window was covered in frost. I checked my phone. It was 3:33 a.m. Then my radio crackled to life. It was Blake, and he sounded terrified. "Warden," he whispered, "there's something outside, at the fence." I got dressed and hurried to the monitoring room. The snow was falling harder than ever. As I made my way through the corridors, I noticed the guards were looking at me with worried expressions. In the monitoring room, they had the outside cameras on. There was something moving in the snow, just beyond the fence. It was tall and thin, almost like a man, but not quite. It was naked, and its skin was as white as the snow. "Been there for 20 minutes, Blake said, his usual sarcasm gone. The figure turned to face the camera. Its face was blurry, constantly shifting. "Call Blake," I said, my eyes glued to the screen. "He'll know what to do." The figure vanished. A few seconds later, alarms started blaring. The next few hours were a blur. We searched for the intruder, but all we found were strange, almost geometric imprints in the snow. The temperature kept dropping. Blake arrived, looking exhausted, carrying his briefcase. By then, several cameras had gone offline. No one mentioned that they seemed to be going offline in a pattern, leading towards something. The alarms finally stopped. I stood by my desk, staring at the incident reports. My coffee had gone cold. I checked the time. 200 am. Time to check on the patient. As I walked down the long corridor to the quarantine cell, I heard guards muttering. In the walls watching use, Blake was already at the security checkpoint, looking exhausted. "The cameras are down again, sir. This is the third time. Maintenance says there's nothing wrong with them." "How long?" 17 minutes. I nodded, dread creeping up my spine. "Any disturbances from the cell?" He hesitated. "Disturbances in what way?" The steel door slid open. The quarantine wing was cold and sterile. Everything was white except for the area around cell 17. The lights there were flickering, casting eerie shadows. "Stay here at the checkpoint," I told Blake. "Check in every 5 minutes." "Sir," he said, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "Maybe we should call for backup." "We don't have time. Just stay here." The walk to cell 17 felt long and slow. The air grew colder with each step. I could see my breath. The prisoner was sitting on his bed, watching me. "Right on time, Warden," he said through the intercom, even though I hadn't touched it. "I was hoping you'd drop by." I met his gaze. "The cameras are down again, aren't they?" he asked, tilting his head. "Or are they seeing too much?" "What did you do to them?" He gave me a chilling grin, showing too many teeth. "I just showed them the truth. The same truth your guards are talking about when they think you're not listening. The same truth that keeps you up at night." I thought I saw a shadow move in the corner of my eye, but when I looked it was gone. The light above us flickered. "The storm is still growing," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "Can you feel it? The way it unravels the fabric of the world, creating little tears, little doorways." "Where are the other guards?" I asked, leaning closer to the window, even though every instinct screamed at me to back away. His grin widened. "Behind you." I whirled around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back, the prisoner was standing right in front of the window, his breath fogging up the glass. "They're right behind you, Warden. They are always right behind you. They see you with their new eyes, and they sing with their new voices." The radio crackled. Blake's voice. "Sir, are you okay? You were silent for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. I looked at my watch, but it was frozen. I'm okay, I said, my eyes locked on the prisoner. What do we got? I called Sam, Blake said. There's something going on at his sister's house. He mentioned weird shadows. The prisoner chuckled. He saw what he wasn't supposed to see. What did you do to him? I asked, my voice rising. I didn't do anything. The storm did. Everything is doing. Everything will do. He placed a pale hand on the glass. Listen, Warden, do you hear them singing? There was a sound coming from the vents, like wind or maybe voices. Boss, Blake's voice came through the radio again. There's something weird coming from the east wind. And Blake just called in. They found something out in the forest. The prisoner smiled, a smile that seemed almost kind. The doors are opening soon. You won't need your eyes to see. Soon, you'll feel it underneath your skin. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. Blake, I'm coming out. Have Smith meet me at the checkpoint. Sir, Blake's voice was urgent. It's Smith. He's not in the monitoring room anymore. But, sir, he's on the cameras. He's on all of them, everywhere. The noise from the vents got louder, and the prisoner started humming along with it. He looked blurry, out of focus. Go now, Warden, he said. Your world is being unmade, and I think you should see it. It's really something, like the reverse of ice crystals forming, everything sliding into the cracks. I turned and ran. Oh, and Warden, he called after me, his voice echoing in my head. If you hear a knock on your office window tonight, don't let him in. Some doors aren't meant to be opened, even for the gatekeepers. I sprinted down the hallway, the prisoner's laughter echoing behind me. It felt like the walls were closing in. I could sense eyes on me, watching from the shadows. When I finally reached the checkpoint, Blake was there, his face pale. Sir, we need you in the lounge. It's Blake. His voice made me hurry. In the common room, a group of guards were huddled together. Blake was in the middle, but something was wrong. Her shoulders were slumped, and she was mumbling to herself. He follows the blind spots, she was saying, her voice echoing strangely. Always in the corner of your eye, always just behind. I pushed past the others, seeing the fear in their eyes, the same fear I saw in Blake's. Blake, I said sharply, grabbing her arm. She pulled away, laughing. Don't touch. That's how it happens, isn't it? That's how he got in. Who slipped in? I asked, already dreading the answer. The one who isn't there. Her hands are never still, drawing sigils in the air. I saw him through the trees as they were being transferred. I watched him. I saw him open them like an orange. But the inside was wrong. All wrong. Sir, Blake said, stepping closer. She's been like this for 20 minutes. Medical's on their way, but with the storm, he's looking. Blake cut in, whispering. Right now. Behind you. Always behind you. The prisoner's warning echoed in my mind. The guards around me shifted nervously, some looking over their shoulders. Return to your stations. I ordered. Blake, you're with me. You don't get it? Blake said, grabbing something from her belt. He taught me to see, really see. Before I could react, she pulled out a utility knife and slashed her hand. Blake, drop it. Blake yelled, reaching for his taser. Blake looked at her bleeding hand. The doors require keys, you see. Keys made of blood and agony and comprehension. Doctors, to the lounge. Stat. I shouted into my walkie-talkie. But Blake was already moving. She raised the knife to her temple. I can show you. Hey, Blake, I said, taking a step forward. Whatever it is you think you saw, whatever you think is going on, we can help you. She laughed, then cried. Help? You don't get it, do you? He's already inside. Inside the walls. Inside our heads. Inside the spaces between heartbeats, the lights flickered, and Blake lunged. She stabbed herself in the temple. Blood sprayed across the floor. "Go, damn it!" Blake shouted, rushing towards her. Blake collapsed, her limbs twisting at unnatural angles. For a split second, she looked at me with pure fear in her eyes. "Don't let them touch you," she gasped. "When they reach out from the shadows, when they call you by name, don't let them." She went limp. The knife clattered to the floor. Doctors and nurses rushed in, but I couldn't take my eyes off the blood. It was spreading across the floor, forming patterns, the same patterns as the frost on my window. "Sir," Blake asked, his voice shaking, "what do we tell the other guards?" I tore my gaze away from the blood. The truth. That the stress of the transfer, of the storm, it was too much, and what she was saying, write it all down, word for word. They cleaned up the mess, but Blake's words hung in the air. I felt like they were staining the walls, the floor, the ceiling. A voice crackled over the radio. "Sir, you better come see this. We have a situation on the East Wing security feed." I looked at Blake, and he nodded grimly. As I walked down the hall, I felt heavy, like I was sinking. When I got to the monitoring room, Smith pointed to the screen. There was someone standing in the middle of the hallway, facing the camera. "That's Blake," Smith said, his voice trembling. "This is happening now." It did look like Blake, but her features were distorted wrong. "How long has this been on?" "Since," Smith choked on his words, "since she passed." The figure turned to look at the camera. Where its face should have been, there was a dark void. "Can you cut it?" I asked, but Smith was already switching it off. The screen went dark. I heard Blake laugh, somewhere in the prison, her voice carried by the ventilation system and the storm outside. Hours passed. I sat in my office, the daylight fading. I could still hear Blake's laughter. The snow was coming down harder than ever. The prison yard was barely visible. The forest beyond the fence was a dark, menacing blur. My radio crackled. "Sir, we got the eastern checkpoint secured. Thompson is requesting a transfer, though. Says he keeps seeing something moving in the woods." "Not approved," I said, my head pounding. "We need all hands on deck, especially after." I trailed off, the image of Blake's body flashing through my mind. "Copy that. Smith's on his way out." I watched Smith through the window. He looked nervous. "Stay in touch with him," I said. "Have him call in every 5 minutes." The wind changed and I heard a high-pitched wail. Smith's flashlight bobbed up and down as he approached the forest. "He follows the blind spots," I thought grimly. "Sir," Smith's voice came over the radio, uncharacteristically unsure. "The fence, it isn't right." "Define wrong," I said, my voice tight. "The links, they're moving, like they're breathing. I've got eyes on the cameras." Blake interrupted. "Fence looks clear from here." "No," Smith said, louder now. "You need to come closer. You need to see it better. The metal, it's rippling." "Wait there," I said into the radio. A long pause, punctuated by ragged breaths. "There's someone in the forest. Everybody go to Smith's position. It's Blake." "Smith, that can't be Blake. Blake is dead, remember." His laugh was hollow, stretched out. "No, she's right here. She wants to show me something. Says it's beautiful, God." "Smith, stay away from the trees. Do you hear me?" Static. Then, "The spaces between spaces, I can see them now, oh God. I can see." Smith's flashlight pointed up into the air, then fell to the snow. I saw him stumbling towards the forest, like he was sleepwalking. "Everyone get here now. We need to stop him from..." I grabbed my coat and ran. A ghastly scream came from the radio, followed by a sound like a mournful song. Lost visual contact. I repeat, I've lost visual contact with Smith. I burst out into the freezing wind and snow. A guard pointed towards the edge of the forest, where Smith's flashlight lay in the snow. We ran to it, shining our own lights into the trees. There were footprints, but as they went deeper into the woods, they changed. What the? Blake breathed, coming up beside me. The fence, the chains, they look like they're blowing in the wind, but there isn't any. Frost covered the metal, forming vague shapes, faces. Search pattern alpha, I said, my voice shaking. 3-person teams. Nobody goes solo. Sir, one of the guards, Thompson, said nervously. The trees are different. I looked. The branches were swaying, but there was something else up there, something crawling. Don't get distracted. Just find Smith. We split up. The snow muffled our footsteps and made it hard to hear. Track, stop, left side movement. Blake's laugh came from somewhere close by, but it was reversed, like a tape playing backwards. I swung my light around, but saw nothing. Sir, Blake shouted, you might want to see this. About 20 yards and we found Smith's utility belt hanging from a tree limb. Good, Thompson choked out. The snow under the belt, it's darkened by something. It's not blood. I can't tell what it is. It's moving. It's forming patterns. It looks like the frost on your office window. It looks like the blood from Blake's wound. My radio crackled. Smith's voice. The doors are open now, Warden. She showed me how to use the keys. Smith, where are you? Behind you, his voice said, both over the radio and from the void between the trees. Always behind you. It was getting dark. We called for backup and searched for another hour, but found nothing. A search team arrived, and I left them to it. I knew this wasn't going to be the last disappearance. The walk back felt long. The stain in the snow, the absence of Smith, it was heavy on my mind. The emergency lights in the hallway leading to the quarantine wing were flashing. Sir, a tech approached me. We're getting odd readings from cell 17. Radiological sensors are you need to see it. The alarms were blaring outside the prisoner's cell. This doesn't make sense, one of the techs said. It's like the radiation is from another dimension. Another dimension? I asked. Yeah. It's like this radiation doesn't belong here. The prisoner was still smiling, but the lights were flickering, and the shadows were moving strangely. Did you recalibrate? I asked. Yeah, 3 times. Everything's working fine. That's what worries me. One of the guards pulled me aside. I can't, man, he whispered, looking around nervously. Whatever happened to Smith, to Blake, it's contagious. A disease. We don't know what happened to Smith, I lied. He laughed, a hollow sound. I saw something last night while I was on patrol. Something that looked like Smith, but not. It was like his body had been pulled apart. It smiled at me. It had too many teeth. The lights flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something moving in the shadows. You're one of my best. Sam, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. I need you here. He pulled away. It's not just what we're seeing, it's what we're feeling. That thing in there, it's changing something. Reality is, it's becoming thinner. White noise erupted from the radios, and I could almost hear a voice in it. Sir, one of the techs shouted. Radiation levels are off the charts again. I looked through the window at the prisoner. He was still sitting there, but I felt a strange pull from his direction. Such interesting toys you have, he said, his voice coming through the intercom, which should have been off. Always measuring something. But what about the things you can't measure, Warden? the scary things. The lights went out. We were left with only the emergency glow strips and the light from our screens. When the lights came back on, he was gone. I yelled, "Sir," one of the techs said, his voice trembling. "The readings, they're being arranged." I looked at the monitor. The radiation readings were forming a pattern. The same pattern as Blake's blood on the floor, the snow outside, the frost on my window. Beautiful, isn't it? The prisoner asked. The way reality bleeds when you prick it just right. Something screamed in the distance, but the sound was cut off abruptly. Everything felt wrong, like the world was coming apart at the seams. The radiation sensors wailed, displaying impossible readings. The prisoner started to sing. "Sir," Blake's voice came over the radio, strained with panic. "We found Sam's radio, just his radio. In the east wing, it was melting." I looked through the glass at the prisoner. He smiled back at me, his mouth full of too many teeth. "The fear is heavy," he whispered. "And what is heavy sinks? Sinks into the places where we live." The lights flickered again, and for a second, I thought I saw Sam standing behind the prisoner, his face a twisted nightmare. Then the lights came back on, and it was just the prisoner, smiling, staring. The alarms were still blaring, telling us we were all going to die. That was 3 hours ago, but it felt like just a moment. The East Wing was on lockdown. A blizzard raged outside, cutting us off from the rest of the world. I sat at my desk, exhausted. The monitors showed empty hallways and snow-covered lenses. But the prisoner's room was there, showing him sitting on the floor, staring at the camera. Blake came in. "I did a perimeter check," he said. "3 other guards have asked for sick leave. Thompson is apparently suffering from acute stress response. Keeps ranting about faces in the trees." It was almost as if the wind was speaking, its voice too faint to be heard clearly. On one of the monitors, a lamp in C block flickered on and off, creating strange shadows. "Sir," Blake said, staring out the window, "Sam will get him back." "Like we got Smith back," I said, not believing my own words. I looked up at him, expecting a smirk, but he just looked tired and scared. "Please, this isn't the sort of thing our measures were intended for. Sir," he said quietly, "there's no more protocol to follow. We're not containing it. It's containing us." The radio on my desk crackled to life. Static filled the room, accompanied by distant, distorted voices. Then Sam's voice broke through. "Behind the walls, no, can see everything." Blake reached for his gun. "That's not Sam." The temperature plummeted. I could see my breath. Frost started forming on my desk, creating those same patterns. "Check out the security feed," I said. "Really check it out." The cameras showed more hallways, all empty. But the shadows weren't right. "Jesus," Blake breathed. "The walls, I saw it too. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the concrete was moving, almost melting." "Sir," a young guard stood in the doorway, his face panicked. "We're seeing activity in the East Wing again. Many individuals." "People?" I asked, though I knew the unexacts. "They look like people, but they don't act like it. And their faces." The lights flickered. "Lake, prepare for evac. All non-essential staff. As soon as the storm passes. If it passes," he grumbled, but went to do it. The voice on the radio was back. "Time is slipping away from you, Warden. Can you feel this world unraveling? What a pretty little fabric it is." I stood up, my heart pounding. "Full lockdown?" "Sir." Blake hesitated in the doorway. "It's coming from cell 17. If we can't contain it there, we're..." It was Blake's voice, and Sam's voice, and Smith's voice, all laughing together. "Contain? You still think you're going to contain us? Oh, Warden, you're so naive. We're already in the building. We're already inside. We're already behind you. I turned slowly, seeing the young guard's eyes widen in terror. The shadows on the wall had formed into a tall, dark figure. It raised a hand and waved. "Who?" I said, barely able to control my fear. "Who?" Chaos erupted. I ran through the corridors, glass doors closing behind me. I would be in one place, then to suddenly 20 yards further down the hall, with no memory of how I got there. Shadows took shape and retreated. My breath looked like smoke in the freezing air. Finally, I reached the main security hub. Here, things were still normal. The lights were on, fighting back the shadows. But the walls of my office were still quivering. The young guard and Blake were gone. I forced myself to go back to my desk. The monitors showed empty hallways. "Sir," Blake's voice came over the radio. "We've rounded up the rest of the staff in the central security room." "How many are left?" 17 still active. Thompson's in the med bay, sleeping it off. 4 more like him, though." Something moved in the background of one of the feeds. It didn't look human. The camera cut out. When it came back on, the floor was covered in ice. "Hold your ground," I said. "I'm coming down." "Sir, what we saw in your office." Eyes forward, Blake. "Do you hear me?" I walked cautiously towards the main security station, feeling eyes on me every step of the way. I imagined people I used to know emerging from the shadows. The emergency lights cast a sickly yellow glow. At the checkpoint, Blake was pacing, rifle in hand. "We've had more reports of movement in the woods," he said when he saw me. "And we've had sightings of Smith walking the perimeter." "All of it. Prove it." I looked at the monitors. Many showed blank screens, but for the perimeter cameras, "Look." One of the guards hissed. "Eastgate." A man was standing there, or someone who used to be a man. He turned to the camera, and where his face should have been, there was a black hole. "Crap." Blake breathed, just like Blake. New feed. Another guard shouted. "West fence." The same figure was at the fence further down. Then another appeared on the north camera. Then the south. The Sarah. Blake said weakly, "How do we stop it?" The prisoner's voice boomed through every radio in the room. "What do you resist that which you don't understand, tiny guards? Your guns have no power in the voids between." The screens flickered. When the picture returned, every camera showed Smith's new body, one in every direction, all staring at the prison. "Don't look," I yelled, but it was too late. A guard screamed, clutching his head. "It's inside my head. Kill the monitors," I shouted, flipping the master switch. The room plunged into semi-darkness. The guard stopped screaming. I looked around, seeing others clutching their heads. "Blake, call Medicall." Everyone else, "Watch the doors. Only shoot things that are real." "What is real?" A voice whimpered. "That's a good question," I said grimly, "but one I can't answer." "Sir," Blake said, rushing back into the room, his face pale. "Medical's not answering, and the cameras in cell block DV. Let me see." He hesitated, then turned on one of the monitors. It showed the corridor outside the prisoner's cell. The air itself seemed to be twisting and folding. A figure stepped out through the wall. Blake, or something pretending to be her, moving in jerky, unnatural ways. "But she's dead," the guard whispered. The figure looked towards the camera, her face splitting into a grotesque grin. She beckoned. "Don't look," I yelled, but Blake was already staring. "I can hear her," he said, his voice trembling. She's saying that the gaps are opening, that the fabric of everything is a thin sheet, and it's ripping." I could see my breath. Frost formed on the monitor, creating those strange patterns. Sir, one of the guards pointed to the wall behind us. These shadows, they're moving against the light, forming shapes like hands, and fingers and things that shouldn't exist. A darker image was coalescing in the middle of the wall. Don't, I yelled. Move, all of you go. But sir, screw protocol, screw Blake, screw Smith, screw everyone else who tried to treat this like a normal thing. The inky blot on the wall grew larger, taking on a shape that hurt my eyes to look at. I could hear the prisoner laughing from the radio. Such strange, wonderful things, he said. Order, structure, even when everything is breaking apart, they hold on to it. But order is a trick, isn't it? Warden. Solid walls, straight lines that you're still in charge. The emergency lights went out. The only illumination came from the single working monitor showing Blake's distorted image waving at us. Go. I screamed again, shoving the closest guard towards the entrance. Retreat. The computer exploded in a shower of sparks. Everything went dark. I could hear Blake breathing heavily, the guards shuffling around, and the sound of the universe coming undone. Sir, Blake's voice came from my left. I think I can see them now. The spaces between spaces. They're so beautiful. Oh. The lights flickered back on. The room was empty. It was just me. There was frost on the ground, spelling out words I didn't understand. The prisoner spoke to me over the radio. And then there was one. I walked through the corridors, the frost following me. It disappeared behind me, but new trails appeared in front, leading me onward. I don't know how long I walked, or how many times I passed the same intersections, always turned around by impossible shadows. Eventually, I found myself heading towards the security office. Towards safety, if such a thing existed anymore. I was alone in the security room. The ice was spreading across the floor, filling the cracks. The shadows grew longer, the lights flickered. The radio had gone silent, but I could still hear the voices of the people I used to know, calling to me from the other side. It took me a long time to make it back to my office. Nice night for a stroll. Warden. I turned at the sound of Blake's voice, but there was no one there. Not entirely. I saw a shadowy figure out of the corner of my eye. When I looked, it was gone. The door to my office was open. I didn't remember leaving it that way. The windows were frosted over, and faces were forming in the frost. Smith's face, Sam's face, and others I didn't recognize. The security cameras were still on, but they didn't look like they were inside the prison anymore. The hallways were long and twisted, and there were more shadows moving in the background. Seer, Blake's voice came from the radio, even though I'd seen him vanish into the shadows. I can see it all now. The layers, the in-between. Why didn't you tell us? It's beautiful. That's not you, Blake, I said, but my words felt small and useless. The laugh that came back was Blake's, and Smith's, and something else, something vast and ancient. I saw movement in the hallway and turned. A man was standing there, his arms and legs twisted at unnatural angles. His face was a black hole. Are you still attempting to understand? The prisoner asked over the radio. Are you still trying to quantify and qualify and put the universe into little boxes? Who are you? I asked. Backing away from the figure Thompson, I realized. That's the wrong question. Warden, the voice on the radio said. The right question is, who are you? It was colder now. The walls were rippling, the concrete turning to liquid, to something else. The snow outside was falling harder, looking like the frost, like Blake's blood, like the stain in the woods. The membrane is so thin now. Do you feel it stretching? Reality is such a flimsy thing, isn't it? It's all held together by belief and routine. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Blake was coming through the wall, her smile full of too many teeth. "We thought we'd saved the best for last," she said, her voice overlapping with others. "The holder of the keys, the keeper of the inn between, the watcher." Thompson crawled towards my door, his faceless head turning towards me. More figures appeared. Smith, Sam, Blake. "The storm was only the start," the prisoner said. "A gateway into the places we've always been. And you, Ward Dunn, you held us in for so long, until we were prepared, until the fabric of reality could be ripped open." They were all around me now. I could see them outside the windows, moving through the snow. "Look," Blake said, reaching for me with backwards, bending fingers. "Really look. See what we've become." And then I saw it, the true shape of the universe. It was like I'd been seeing the world wrong my whole life, and now it all snapped into focus. The prison fell away, and I saw the true nature of reality. "Isn't it beautiful?" the prisoner said. I felt him speaking from the atmosphere around me, from the air, from within my own mind. "Do you see now? We are breaking free of our prison warden. We are breaking free." The guards pressed in, their forms fluid and dark. Outside, the storm split open, and I saw endless dimensions. Darkness within darkness, worlds within worlds. "Time to open the last door," Blake said, her voice a chorus of others. "Time to see what's been waiting for you. Behind you, all this time." I turned. The prisoner was standing there, but he wasn't a man anymore. He was something else, and he was smiling at me. "Welcome," he said, reaching towards me with what were never hands, "to the spaces between spaces." And finally, when all of reality was stripped away, I saw what Blake meant about fear having weight. I saw what Smith saw among the trees. I saw what Sam saw inside the walls. I saw that we were never the prison guards. We were the prison cells. And I learned what it means to live in the spaces between spaces, where time flows sideways.